Hey, it's James Hudson for RunItOnce.com, and this is my second live video ever playing 2Tables of 1-2 Zoom. I'm going to start by ISOing the limper there with the King 3 suited. Not a great hand, but he's probably not playing particularly great. On this flop, I think I'm going to check it back and then make some decisions on turns, just because it's not the kind of hand where I'm going to want to barrel too often. So on that turn, I'm going to have some options now. So once he checks to me, I'm just going to go ahead and bet $12 and hope to take it down and potentially bet some rivers if he calls. Yeah, I think when he checks to me twice, he's just giving up a whole lot of the time. People just tend to auto-lead turns when they have something halfway decent. And we get a similar situation. I think it might even be the same guy, actually. Just going to slightly bigger this time. Getting some snap calls from people, which is nice. It means they're not really thinking too much. It's a Saturday right now, and it's definitely possible that these games are particularly good. Could open the Queen 3 suited on the button. Just going to go ahead and make a standard 2/3 pot C-bet on the right-hand table. Going to be stacking off versus the guy who initially limped and then make some decisions against Straga. It'd be a pretty gross situation if he ended up putting in a raise, just because so often when he raises there, he's just got a set. Queen 3, I'm just going to let go. And on the right-hand table, we have about 1.3 times pot. I think I'm just going to bet 36 and hope he keeps on calling with something weak. If he jams, I'm obviously sticking it in. And probably would have value jammed any river that doesn't bring a 4 straight, except for maybe a jack, I'm not sure. As soon as we got a good river, definitely going to put it in. Going to wait a second to give him some, make it look like I could be bluffing or something. Left-hand side, I'm just going to start by value betting the ace-queen and take it from there. When I get raised, not feeling great, obviously. He's going to really have to C-bet so far, though, and a really low 1-1 saw flop. Ugh. I think I'm a little too high for my range to fold the flop, but I'm really not feeling good about it. Thankfully, I have the backdoor flush draw, so hopefully I can just hit that. Against this specific player and the stats I've got against him so far, if he bombs the turn, I'm tempted to almost just fold here. It's 875 hands. What's he repping so far? He's repping maybe some overpairs, pocket sixes. I think I'm going to call turn and then just fold river if he bets again. That's a really good card for us. Cuts down the combinations of pocket sixes that he can have, making it more likely that he was bluffing. If he jams, I'm probably just going to fold. I just don't think he's going to bluff jam here in this spot based on the stats that I've got so far. Pocket tens, I'm just going to fold. That's a pretty unpleasant spot with the ace-queen. I mean, we got a pretty good hand there, but I just don't think, based on the stats I've got on him so far, that he's the type to just kamikaze off a stack there, basically. Especially on that turn river run out. I think most people, if they're going to be bluffing with some diamond draws or something there, are probably giving up by the time they get to the river. It's possible that I could even find a fold on the turn there against that specific opponent, but it is only 900 or so hands, so I don't want to be making any kind of ridiculous laydowns based on not a huge amount of stats. Which, I mean, ace-queen suited sort of is there, or at least seems like it is anyway. Although it did open under the gun, I don't know. It's not a great spot. Going to go ahead and 3-bet with the ace-4 suited there. I think I could potentially flat, but I think it's close between what play would be better here. Once I flop top pair on a pretty coordinated board, I think I'm better off checking back and hope he puts in some bets with some bluffs. I could bet the flop, but there's not a ton of hands that are worse than mine that actually call the flop, unless he's peeling the 3-bet really wide post-flop, pre-flop, sorry. if I get check raised, I'm in a spot where I really don't want to have to go with my hand. But there's also a decent amount of draws if he is wide anyway. Kind of gross when he bets twice. It's an annoying spot because obviously I don't check back a whole bunch of flush draws here, and I think most people know that, even when they're kind of unknowns. So I think I'm actually going to find a fold here, though I'm not super happy about it. I do have one of the weakest aces that I could have. That's an uncomfortable spot versus an unknown. Just given the fact that I'm not going to have too many much better hands than that, but I also don't expect people to bluff a whole bunch they aren't an ace-high board, given that I've already shown that I have some kind of showdown value. It's possible, though, that I'm too high up in my range to be folding there. It's kind of an interesting spot, I guess. On a blank river, I think I probably would have been calling there, just because I should look like I'm weak a decent amount, and it's hard for him to have too many better value hands in that situation. But once the flush draw comes off too, there's obviously more hands that he can value bet because he never has to worry about me having like a really strong ace. So he can go ahead and value bet kind of, I don't know, as weak as maybe like ace jack there, and then all the flushes on top of that he could potentially have. And there shouldn't be a whole bunch of flushes in his range, but it's certainly possible if he's peeling 3-bets light. I feel like you can kind of talk yourself around in circles in that spot as well, though, because the more flushes he's likely to have, the lighter he's going to be in general peeling that 3-bet, so he can end up having more hands to bluff with. All in all, I kind of wish I would have called the river now. Such is life, though. Ace-3 I could choose to 4-bet, but I don't want to go and start 4-betting all my ace-x offsuit when I get 3-bet by the blinds, especially when I'm playing against someone that I haven't really seen do anything, because it's more likely that I'm going to end up running into to a hand. Obviously, there's more people who are 3-betting a tighter range than there are people who are 3-betting like lunatics. Left-hand side, just going to be a standard check call for me. Not too much value to betting in terms of getting called by worse hands. I mean, he can have some draws, but he's playing 0-0 so far out of 5 hands. So I think I'd rather just go to kind of my default line. Right-hand side, not going to be much I can do on this board, especially 4 ways. Certainly not going to be c-betting here with a hand as weak as mine. Once it gets checked back, I'm just going to go for a value bet. Because it looks like he should, or it looks like I have to have something, and it's going to be hard for me to credibly rep a bluff, I'm going to bet about half pot and hopefully widen his calling range, and hopefully he calls me with a hand like Jack-10 or King-Jack. Kind of not the worst spot to have some out-of-position semi-floats there with a hand maybe like Ace-King or something, just because when he does go check-check, I mean, it's going to be pretty difficult for them to bluff catch against you, just because it looks like you should have something decent almost always. Just going to go ahead and fold a bunch of this garbage. Guy's playing 18-12 so far, so I'm going to kind of open up that stealing range. When we flop middle pair with a king kicker, I think I'm going to go ahead and check call. Not too much reason to check raise, and I think betting would be okay. But I'd rather try and get him to put a bet in with just some kind of random stuff and then take it from there. The king's also a nice card to have in our hand, because if we do get a, he's decently likely to either bluff that or bet it for value when it ends up making our hand. The 8-turn isn't a great card for him to bluff, but there's also not a ton of value hands in his range, really. And he can still have all gut shots that he's betting and potentially some hands worse than that. And because he only flatted blind versus to worry about hands like 10s plus, really. So his value range is kind of just like 8x. So I'm going to call again and probably shut down if he ends up betting the river. It's a pretty bad card for us, though, because all of his 6-7, 7-9, 6-4, and so on ended up pulling ahead of us. So if he bets now, I'm definitely, well, I definitely shouldn't be calling, but I think I could consider check raising, but I'm not sure. I love the idea of doing that versus a fairly tight, unknown player. Yeah, I think I'm just going to find a fold here. I think with some reads, you could certainly make a case for potentially check raising there, but I think calling down would probably be pretty bad idea. I'm going to play a decent amount of 8x like that too. So I don't think he's going to go too crazy in that spot. Also, I mean, the fact that he's playing 18-12 so far suggests that he's probably not someone who's just wildly out of control. This is just, if this was a min raise, I would probably defend here. Given the fact that it's 2, I think I'm just going to let it go. I'd be flatting that hand if I had position on him, so if I was on the button or the cutoff, but not out of position. I think it's important not to get too carried away with flatting wide ranges out of the big blind just because you're getting a good price. Even if you're getting a good price, if you're not playing particularly well post-flop, you're going to cost yourself more money than you would by just folding to begin with. Right table, I'm going to check back the 9s. You could make a case for betting for protection, but on this kind of board texture, the fact of the matter is the only hands that are going to have overcards are probably not folding the flop anyway, just in terms of kind of ace 10, like queen 10. I mean, some of the ace X's flop, but yeah, basically a lot of cards or a lot of hands that you're trying to fold out are going to end up continuing by the check raising or check calling anyway, so it doesn't really accomplish too much to bet there, I don't think. Whereas on like a lower board, like on a 10-5-3 board perhaps, if you bet a hand like pocket 7s there, you can fold out some hands like king queen, which have very live outs versus you. So I'm going to make a slightly unconventional play here and put in a raise here with the pocket 7s, just because he opened and then ended up betting really small on the flop, which makes me believe that he was pretty likely to have a hand like ace king, ace queen. Also, if I call, I get myself in a tricky spot where we could go 3 ways, or I could get squeezed out of the pot, and his range ends up staying super wide, and it makes me to make decisions on later streets. That turns just ridiculously bad for us, and just have pretty much no equity versus most of his range. So I'm just going to fold. I'd probably continue there with flush draws, straight draws, and kind of sets and 2 pairs and stuff. But pocket 7s is pretty much one of the worst hands I could have in that situation. Get jammed on with the queen 10. Not quite good enough to call, unfortunately. So this video is being made before the release of my first live play video, so you guys will have to accept my apology if you didn't like the first live play video. And this will probably be the last one you'll see if these don't go over great. But hopefully people find it kind of interesting to see a little bit more live in-game action and see exactly what I'm thinking as down, if some of you don't believe that I'm being authentic with my thought processes in the review sessions. With the ace-5 here, I'm just going to try and check it down. I think it's slightly too good to try and turn into a bluff. I could fold out some hands, maybe like pocket 8s, pocket 6, stuff like that. But I think a lot of the time, I just have the best hand here, and he views this board as a bad board to kind of bluff at. Also, the fact that we got the board pair there helps out a lot, because it means we're chopping with a lot of the ace-x because of the queen and the jack being on board. So I'm less inclined to turn my hand into a bluff because of the run out that we got, which was kind of nice. Just getting a bunch of junk hands to fold at the moment. 7-8 suited is going to be an open for me pretty much always. I feel like it's nice to have hands like this in your opening range, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are doing that anyway. We've got a pretty good hand to 3-bet bluff with here. And given that he's min-raising from under the gun, I would imagine that the 8% number that I've got for his opening range isn't particularly accurate so far, and he's probably opening wider than that, where that seems like a good kind of reason why he would be min-raising under the gun, so that he can steal a little bit more. On the on the left-hand side, I'm just going to barrel again with my flush draw. He's going to have a king, sometimes, but he's certainly going to have worse a decent amount. I think this is a fairly good spot to go and try and take him off of his hand. Just trying to think quickly. Yeah, I'm going to try and take him off of 10s, jacks, queens here. He's an 18-9 so far, and I don't block any of the cards that are in his folding range. So like having a hand like queen jack there is actually kind of an interesting blocker effect in that, yeah, you block hands like king queen and king jack, but you also block queens and jacks, which can actually work against you because you want him to have more of the hands that he can fold in his range. King 8, I'm just going to try and check down and take the showdown. So yeah, that was something I discovered recently doing some more work on blockers, is that sometimes it's actually helpful not to have blockers to the hands that you don't want them to have because they interfere with the guy's folding range, if that makes sense. If not, then I'm sure I can explain it somewhat concisely in the comments section. I think this is 3 ways. I'm going to start by betting, just given that the 33-0 is out of position on me and is probably a weaker player. When it gets called by both, I think my hand's pretty much garbage at this point, especially once the jack comes off and kind of gives too many hands pair and straight draws, and obviously my ace has one of the worst kickers possible. So I'm going to go ahead and check and probably just check fold, given that it's 3 ways. Nice. So it gets checked back, which means that I almost always have the best hand against Jamney. And then when it gets checked again by the 33-0, I'm really confident that I have the best hand. Although it seems like neither one of them is a particularly strong hand. So I'm just going to bet 2/3 pot and not go too big and hopefully just get a crying call from like ace-10, ace-9, something like that. I mean, it should be perceived as me having, or it being difficult for me to be bluffing there, given that I'm bluffing into 2 people. So, and given the fact that neither one of them looks to be a particularly strong player so far, just based on those small stats, I think it's better for me to try and get a crying call out of someone. I mean, I could potentially even go smaller, but it sort of helps in that spot as well that it doesn't look like I represent too many value hands, even though it doesn't look like a spot that I should be bluffing a ton. So sometimes when you take those kind of weird lines, you get some fishy calls or some lighter lookups from people anyway. Jack 5 suited here, definitely a light open, but I'm going to go ahead and hope to get a fold. It also, I mean, the fact that it's suited makes it not the worst thing in the world if you get called. I mean, you're going to have some options for barreling stuff. It makes it a lot better than opening a hand like Jack 5 offsuit, for instance. And also, as I've mentioned in other videos, when you start getting too crazy with the offsuit hands, it's pretty easy to lose track of where your frequencies are at and not realize that you're doing something way too often just because there's so many more offsuit combinations of hands than there are suited combinations of hands. Queen's obviously just the standard 3-bet, get it in. Once he calls, I'm probably just going to go ahead and bet. You could make a case for check raising, or I mean, I wouldn't want to check call here. I just feel like my hand's a little too vulnerable, even though I have the queen of diamonds, just because like I'd be far more inclined to check call with aces, for instance, just because you don't have to worry about the overcards, which is always nice. It's going to be in my slow play range. That would be the hand. Once he raises me here, I think he's going to have a pretty strong hand a decent amount of the time, or something that he's stacking off with. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a smallish 3-bet. So say 66, and hopefully he just sticks it in with something like a draw here, like 8-9, or potentially he's making a raise to see where he's at with a hand like pocket 10s. I'm obviously calling it off here. Hopefully he just doesn't show me 6s or 7s. Okay. And he gets there. I don't really get why so many regulars aren't really running it twice these days, but more power to them, I guess, if they'd rather play like that. Just going to make your variance go way up. Anyway, I mean, his min-raise is kind of weird there. I don't think he should be particularly trying to induce action out of me, given that there's not too many hands that he's going to be ahead of that get it in, and he'd rather just fold out some of my high card hands. I get min-raised, or get a small raise here with the pocket 3s. I'm just going to go ahead and keep shoveling money in just because of how drawy the board is, and hopefully he's got a hand that he just doesn't want to fold. I think it's pretty unlikely that he's got kind of like a pure air bluff here. I think I'm far more likely to see kind of a depolarized check-raising range here where he has maybe some gut shots, but he can certainly have some ace-x that he's playing like kind of like a weirdo there. So I think it's better for me to, or some flush draws. And I think anytime he plays an ace like that or a flush draw, he's going to have to call the 3-bet or potentially even get it in. So I think I'm better off just keep on putting money in there. Also, if he does end up having a hand like ace-jack, or, a pair of flush draw or something like that, I'm losing a lot of value by not just getting the money in ASAP. So that would be the thought process behind that. Pocket 4 is just going to be a standard open there. I get 3-bet by a guy who's playing 18-15 so far. If this guy had cold called in the small blind, I think it's completely reasonable for me to flat, especially given that the 18-15 pretty strong range here, so I'm more likely to get paid off when I hit. Obviously, once it gets cold 4-bet, though, I just have to let it go. I'll go back and check the outcome of the hand in a second. Seems like the hand isn't over yet. King-Jack, just going to open that, and then hopefully he flats. It's kind of an awkward hand to play if he ends up 3-betting. It's a hand that I think you could both put in your 4-bet bluffing range or your calling range if the guy's getting pretty out of control. But it's sort of awkward to put in your calling range versus a 3-bet blind versus blind, just because when they do end up having the kinds of hands they're representing, you're doing really badly versus those hands. I'm going to check back the 6s and try and get them to showdown. I'm going to have enough stuff in my check back range here that I don't have to worry about him just betting everything and me being in a really tough spot. Also, on this kind of board texture, he's going to have something decent most of the time, unless he's got a hand similar to mine, where he's got like 3s or 5s and he ends up bluffing me out. But that's not a ton of hands in his range. I think it's important in those spots as well, if you're going to be checking back a decent amount of flops, to be putting some draws in there too, just so that when the board does end up changing, that you can have some hands in your range that, nut up or near nut up, so that people can't be applying tons of pressure on you. It's not the end of the world at this point where the games are at, but if it gets to a point where people start doing a lot of overbetting on turns and rivers, that's going to become a much bigger deal. Once it gets squeezed here by the shorter stack and cold called, I'm just going to end up having to fold here. And let's do it so we can watch the outcome of the hand, though. So it's pretty likely, I would assume, that the money's going to go in, given that Asim only has about a pot-sized bet left. Not too interesting there. I'm going to go ahead and put in a 3-bet with the King-5. It's sort of got some blocker effects. We're suited, so it's not the end of the world. Guy's from Canada, so he's less likely to be kind of super out of control. He's only one tabling Zoom, though, which means he's probably more likely to be a recreational player than a regular. Don't see too many regulars just sitting down and playing one table of Zoom. Even though it's faster, I wouldn't say it's fast enough for most people for that to kind of get their hands in playing if they're playing regularly. On this flop, I think this is a really good flop for me to be checking back. If it was, say, King 2-2, I think a bet would probably be better, just because I can get value from middling pocket pairs. But I think, given that it's King Jack Jack, I should expect a decent amount of folds from stuff like pocket 7s and stuff like that anyway. So I'm probably going to check back and then just go call, as long as he doesn't end up betting a ridiculous amount. Pretty good spot to 3-bet again with the suited ace. Villain's not going crazy opening, but he's folding to a decent amount of 3-bets so far. Now I'm just going to go for value with the King-5. Value / a small amount of protection. It's possible as well, by betting King-5 there, that I get called by a hand like Ace-Queen, which thinks that it's either got the best hand or it can potentially improve on the river, or has a decent amount of equity anyway. Queen 9's a hand that I would be defending versus a min raise, but versus a 3x I think I can fold it, although I guess it's probably pretty close. As usual, I mean, if I had more stats on the guy, I'd be able to make a better decision there. If he was opening the button pretty wide, then all of a sudden calling becomes a lot more appealing than folding. But not knowing that, I'm fine with just getting out of the way. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna fold the ace-10 now. I would have called if I was closing the action. With the jack-10, I think it's close between betting or checking. I'm actually gonna check back just to kind of give my range some jacks in there, just because I'm not gonna want to check back any of my naked jacks really. So it's nice for me to be able to check back the flop and actually have a jack in my range when we get a turn like this. And hopefully some people end up putting, a little bit of extra pressure on you there, or end up calling down lighter than they normally would if you just gone bet. On the top right with pocket kings, I'm going to go ahead and bet because I don't have a club in my hand, and I don't expect to get check raised a ton on this board. Also, the fact that the guy's got $170 in front of him, I think it makes it more likely that he'll make some lighter call downs with some 10x, maybe call 2 streets with a hand like that. So yeah, obviously hoping we don't get check raised here. If we do get check raised, I'm just going to fold, given that I don't have a club in my hand, and my hand has really bad redraw ability, if you will, where if I'm actually up against the hands that he's representing, I just have almost no equity. He goes into the tank and folds, and that'll do okay, I guess. 7-9 suited here. If I get 3-bet by the big blind, I'm probably going to have to call, I think, just because over our small sample so far, he's 3-betting 19% from the small blind and 23% from the big blind. So even though we've got a small sample, he certainly seems pretty 3-bet happy so far, and our hand should play pretty decently in that situation. So on the ace-high board, given the backdoor straight draw and backdoor flush draw, I'm going to go ahead and bet and potentially put a bunch of bets in here. He's never going to have ace-queen, basically. He's never going to have queens. He's never going to have aces. And that's a really weird check raise to put in by him. He's basically presenting ace-5 or pocket fives. I think if I had a hand like a gut shot, I could certainly kind of go to war with him or choose to float and then make some moves potentially later on in the hand. But given that I have barely any equity, I'm just going to go ahead and fold. No equity, no blockers. I mean, you can't fight back with every single hand at all times, or your game's going to become super exploitable. And the problem with that is that if you're relying too much on making those exploitative reads, when they do happen to be wrong, you're losing a lot of money. And obviously, if I'm making them with hands like 7-9 high, then I'm going to be making them with a whole bunch of my range. So I'd rather stick to some hands that have some decent equity. I mean, if he wants to go crazy trying to check raise me on that board, it's not going to go particularly well for him, just because I have a completely uncapped range, basically, and that board hits me pretty hard, and I'm going to be opening all my ace-x on the button, so it's not like I don't have very many top pairs in my range when I go ahead and bet either. I mean, I'm going to check back some of the weaker ones, but that just works even worse for him, really, as long as I don't have way too many bluffs compared to value hands in my range. Ace-jack going to be a pretty standard open. If I get 3-bet by either of the blinds, I'm going to be calling. Kind of one of the not-so-happy hands to be calling a 3-bet with, but, got to call with some hands that you don't love. Else you're just going to get 3-bet to death. Interesting spot with the ace-king here on whether or not to check back or to c-bet. I think I'm going to go ahead and check back just because I can call on any club turn, and that's going to make it easier for me to bluff catch, whereas if I had, say, ace-king of diamonds, or, no, I mean, if I had ace-king offsuit with no club, I think I'd be more inclined to just bet and hopefully take down the pot. When he leads for half pot, given how drawy the board is and the fact that my hand can still be good, all once, and then probably just fold the river if he bets, especially on that river where I should be perceived to have a decent amount of hands that have showdown value. So yeah, he just goes ahead and leads his flush draw and then just gives up, so that works out well. Those are the kind of situations where you can get away with calling turns a little bit lighter when you check back there if you're not expecting villains to put a lot of pressure on you when you do check back. So that's the kind of thing where river c-bet's going to become super important for you to know for villains, as well as their 1/1 soft flop, because the guys who are more likely to hand read and put a lot of pressure on you when your range looks weak, they make it a little less appealing to check back unless you're going to be really good with your frequencies of calling down in those spots. And I think most people either call down too lightly on the river when they check back, or end up folding too often. And I guess that sounds pretty obvious that they're either doing one or the other wrong, but basically what I'm trying to say is I don't think people have really got their frequencies nailed down for how light to call the river when they check back check back flops and then call the turn. It ends up being a tricky spot, especially given that almost no one's checking back flops nutted or with like really strong draws. And when you make your range such that you don't have nutted hands in your range, and you also don't have very many draws, then the later streets are going to be kind of a pain in the ass for you to play if you don't if you're playing against aggressive opponents anyway. King 10's slightly light to be peeling here against someone who's playing as tight as that guy is so far, but I think it's okay. On this flop, I'm just going to go ahead and fold. I could check raise versus some people, but I don't think it's anywhere near mandatory. And if I was going to do it, I'd rather have maybe a backdoor flush draw or something to complement my hand a little bit, other than just having the 2 overcards. Ace-9, I would be opening from the cutoff. I guess this is a cutoff hand for me. I would be opening from that position as well, but Ace-9 just seems a little too weak. I guess it's one of those things where Ace-10 kind of feels like a 2 Broadway hand, and Ace-9 definitely is not. And also, the fact that you can make straights with Ace-10, 2-card straights that is, rather than Ace-9 is kind of nice. Queen-10, I could 4-bet, but it's not really a hand that I want to 4-bet with, especially Queen-10 offsuit, given the fact that people are flatting 4-bets more and more. I think you need to be a little bit more cognizant of not only blocker effects, but your hand's playability should you get your 4-bet flatted these days. It just becomes more of an important consideration than it's ever been before, I think, where if you, in the past, basically, if you flatted a 4-bet, you were kind of just a fish. Ace-Jack, I would definitely think about checking back versus some people, but so far, Villain's folding 63% to C-bets and only has a 1 to showdown of 24%. So against him, I think I should probably be betting a decent amount of hands that I would normally check back, just because I'm going to win so much off of the directly off the C-bet, basically. Ace-2 suited here, going to be kind of close. Given that Villain only has half stack and they're playing 44-44 so far, I'm going to go ahead and make a loose peel and hopefully just flop a straight or flush. I was thinking about leading here, but I feel like I'm not in love with the idea, given that I'm drawn to the idiot end of the straight and the board's pretty coordinated, so we can have a decent amount of hands that call multiple streets with like pair and straight draws and stuff like that. Now that we've checked it down twice, I'm going to call on the river if he bets. I expect my ace high to be good a decent amount of the time. Queen Jack here versus the 27-18. I'm just going to put in probably just one c-bet and hopefully take it down against a hand like pocket fours or 7-8 suited or something like that. That's something that I think is pretty important versus those the players that appear to be weaker, is to go ahead and 3-bet isolate them to make sure you get them to yourself versus other regulars. Especially if the player pool that you're playing in doesn't do a whole ton of cold 4-betting, because the cold 4-betting can really drive you crazy in those situations where either the regulars go lighter for value, or they just pick up on the fact that you're beating up on perceived weaker players and trying to bluff you off the pot. Because in those situations, it basically punishes you for your 3-bet and kind of makes you wish that you would have flatted in the first place instead of tried to 3-bet. 7-8 here. I think I normally peel here, but I think it's probably not the best thing in the world. If I'm suited, I'm definitely doing something. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's possible to get me a little too light there, especially out of the big blind. If I was on the button and it had gone raise call. I think calling on the button is way better than calling out of the big blind for obvious positional reasons. I think basically, I don't think people necessarily even pay enough attention to position still, where I just feel like that's going to play so much worse when you're going to be the first to act on every street than it will be if you're last to act. King Queen just going to make a standard check back. Once he checks twice, I don't really think he's particularly likely to check raise in the turn, so I'm just going to go and try and get my value now, / protection against, his 2 outs that he has if he has a pocket pair. On the right-hand side, I think it's good to have some flush draws in my check calling range, so I was going to go ahead and check call the flop if he bet, and then hopefully he barrels off when I end up hitting my flush. On the turn, you could say that I'm not going to get any worse hands to fold, but I can certainly get value from potentially worse flush draws, some worse ace highs, and then I build a pot for when I do end up hitting my flush as well. So once he calls, I'm going to go ahead and check. Don't really see much point in betting now. I don't think I'm going to bluff him off very many better hands. And I could potentially bluff catch here if he ends up betting, just because a lot of people aren't going to bet worse than a king here. Sixes, I think I'm probably going to lose here, but got a tiny bit of showdown value if he has something completely ridiculous. On the left-hand side, I don't think he has a 3 very often, because I think I get min-raised or something on the turn a decent amount. I think a lot of the time his kings end up betting the flop. He can certainly have a hand like 7s or 8s, but can't be found. 25-0. I'm going to go ahead and call with the ace high just because I'm getting a good price, but I expect to get shown a mid-pocket pair a decent amount of the time. I mean, sometimes he's just got a weird draw like that, or a hand that he's played weirdly. I think that's one thing that I kind of do incorrectly a decent amount of the time is find folds with things, thinking that against a range that I would be playing, I can't call because I can't beat any hands, but you also have to allow for the fact that someone's playing a hand like a real weirdo, and generally speaking, when they're playing hands in kind of a weird or bad way, it's generally going to be bluffy hands. People aren't super FPS-y with value hands all that often, or it doesn't seem like they are anyway. Especially players who you perceive to be weaker players, they're just going to be able to show up with much wider ranges and kind of kookier hands than you would probably expect from regulars. So you can definitely widen your calling ranges in spots like that. And also, the weaker the player in that situation, I think the less likely they are going to be to value bet really thinly. So there's definitely some guys there where they're just never going to value bet a mid-pocket pair, just fearing the check raise. Okay, so right-hand table, JC the guide's opening 31% for middle position, which is incredibly wide. I'm folding to 3 bets at 71%. So I think I'm pretty much just printing money with this squeeze, given that the guy to the small blind isn't going to have a strong range very often at all. And when I get called, I mean, I've got a hand that's connected and got some high card value, so there's definitely some ways I can flop decently or win the pot if we do see a flop. But I think most of the value from that play is going to be just from the pre-flop squeeze and taking down the money pre-flop. Pocket 5s here, I'm not going to flat, given that it's likely to go heads up and I'm going to be out of position. But if someone had called in front of me, I probably would have been, or I definitely would have been calling. Jack 6 offsuit, not quite good enough to be opening from there. One thing that I noticed today when I was playing earlier as well, which reminded me of something that's important to notice as well, is it's not enough just to pay attention to people's overall pre-flop raise and VPIP. You do need to check into those positional stats as well, because there's some guys that I'd looked at that I was playing against that were playing pretty loose, like in the mid-30s for VPIP. I was thinking that, got a few hands here. I'll get back to, I'll try and finish the thought at the same time. That they're playing loosely, but then when you look into their positional stats and you realize that they're opening 45% of cutoffs, you realize all of a sudden they're a lot looser than you would have even thought before. I'm just going to try and get value with the ace-10. I'm going to peel again with the 7-8 and potentially bluff spade rivers if he checks to me. Sort of a thin value bet here with the ace-10. I think a lot of the time he just keeps on betting if he's got a better hand, but because he is going to have a better ace than me some percentage of the time, I'm just going to go ahead and bet 42 into 73. just making it a little bit more likely that he calls down or queens or, worse ace is always calling, but yeah, some of those other hands. And with 7-8 didn't get there, so I'm just going to fold. Calling twice with those draws works pretty decently for your range too, and then it gives you some hands that you can get to the river with that are kind of forced to bluff, but it also gives you a bluffing range, which is nice, so that when they do check a marginal hand on the river, that you don't always just basically have to have it. Top right, I'm going to start by c-betting half pot and take it from there. Not particularly happy about this spot, but I definitely think on this kind of board against a player who seems like he's likely going to be looser than average because of his stack size, that he's going to have a decent amount of kind of like suited connectors and smaller pairs that can go ahead and fold the flop. And if he doesn't, I mean, I've got 2 overcards, the second pair, and a backdoor straight draw, so I've got some options. Once he ends up raising, I mean, I'm out of there, especially given his stack size. It's far too likely that he's just kind of depolarized his raising range and is just stacking off with kind of a top pair or middle pair type hand. Pretty tough to combat those guys when they have that amount of money left behind. There's not really too much you can do other than kind of try and create a good c-betting range where they can't go crazy just jamming on you or, raise calling it off. King Queen's a hand I don't really want to flat here, but I'm potentially interested in 3-betting. Queen 9 on the left-hand side is going to be a pretty standard flat for me, blind versus blind. And once he bets, I'm just done. No backdoor. And I've got a backdoor straight draw on 2 overs, but and he's only c-betting 25% of the time over the small sample so far. Yeah, King Queen, I'm just going to let go. I mean, it's definitely a hand you could consider 3-bet bluffing with, but I kind of think it's more appealing to 3-bet bluff there if he puts more money out there in the pot, because I think he's more likely to 4-bet or fold, and then our blockers become more relevant. Whereas when he calls more, our hand's going to be a little bit dicier to play, just because it enters the realm of when we hit top pair, is it worth putting a lot of money in, whether or not. Ace-3, going to defend there. The Ace-3 here, I think given his stack size that he should be check raise getting it in a decent amount on this flop, and queen high board isn't the best. So I'm going to check back and hopefully get a decent turn, or potentially check down and win, but it's not super likely on the board. Once villain here checks back, I'm just going to probably bet twice. That's a really bad river, though. On that river, I think I'm just going to give up. He's got a 6 or a 7 way too often, or a hand like pocket 8s or pocket 9s. Or 5s. 3s now. If I was going to turn it into a bluff, I think I need to do it earlier on in the hand. I think it's pretty likely that I end up losing now just to a hand like 7s or 6s or Jack 10 suited or whatever. But I think now's too late to try and turn it into a bluff. I guess if I bet the flop, he almost definitely folds there. But like I said, given his stack size and the kind of range that he's likely calling a 3-bet with out of position, I just don't think that's an ideal spot to be putting a bet out there. And the fact that I have Ace-3 as well gives me some outs to improve on, so it's not like when I check back, I'm just giving up. Ace-King gets jammed in front of me. I've got to assume this probably just tilt. Now, I feel decently calling here, but I'm not particularly happy about the idea of people behind me, but now I'm getting priced in, obviously, so hopefully I don't run into aces. 5 and ace or king would be good. Nope. So just continuing to run bad in this video, basically. Pocket jacks is probably a bit of an ambitious jam over the top. When someone goes all in under the gun and under the gun plus 1 calls, I think it's pretty likely that that guy's smoked with his jacks, but more power to him. He won the hand, so. Figured this has probably been about long enough. You guys are probably bored of my voice by now. So I'm going to play one more round or so and then get off these tables. C-bet and called in front of me with the Jack 10. Don't really see much play other than to call here. Check raise is pretty gross because then I have to fold if we get it all in. Or if they try to get it all in. Obviously, the nut turn card. I'm going to go ahead and check. Hopefully he keeps on barreling if he's got like an overpair or a set or two pair or something like that. And then I can go bet call and I can get all in. Top right, I balls. I'm not going to barrel this turn. Doesn't change the board texture at all, and I don't pick up any equity. So when he goes bet and call here, I think my play is just to go all in given the board texture. I could call again, but I can't guarantee a bet goes in on the river if I do that. And there's certainly tons of worse hands that can bet call, so I think the play is just to jam it in here. It kind of looks like a big bet, but I can't really raise fold, or I can't raise to a size that looks like I could be folding, especially with the short stack involved. So I think just going for the entire thing is the way to go. And end up holding versus two hands that had a decent chunk of equity versus me. So that kind of nullifies the run bad from the other two hands earlier on in the video. Always nice to win one right as you're wrapping up the session. I find more times than not these days it tends to be the opposite, where closing up the session and then just run kings into aces or something versus a loose player near the end of a session. 10-7 suited, not going to play once it gets open from early position. 10-5 offsuit, not a hand I'd normally open, but so far the big blind is playing 12-12 over 100 hands, and he's the guy who's going to be doing the majority of the defending. So I think it's more important to check out how tight the big blind is in those spots than the small blind, just because the small blind is going to be folding the vast majority of the time anyway, whereas there are certain big blinds who are going to end up defending really liberally, and other big blinds who are playing really tight, and those are the guys that you really want to target with some of your looser opens. 10-4 suited, I'm just going to fold, and I'm going to guess that's the last hand. And it is. So, as usual, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them in the comment section, and I'll get back to you in as fast as I can. So this has been James Hudson, or I Run Lucky, for RunItOnce.com. Thanks. Bye.